Hey everyone, this is Louis7, and today I have a trait build guide video in the Lord of the Rings Online, this one being on the Redline Hunter, and this is actually my first one since the Mines of Moria is released for the Legendary servers, and as the other ones it's kind of been inspired by that, so I will have a little bit of emphasis on those level ranges for Moria, but I will be going over each trait choice in detail in this and include a gameplay section like my previous ones, and that will show, the gameplay section will show the general rotation, how traits play out. I also want to mention the build isn't necessarily for in-game raiders doing more difficult content, but the guide itself is valid for everything, and the specific build though is geared towards leveling and solo play, as well as casual grouping in the DPS role, definitely works for that. And I chose Redline for this one, for the first one I'm doing for Hunter, because it's the spec I'm most familiar with, and as well it's the one I'm most comfortable doing a build on. On top of that, I find the spec actually fun compared to the other Hunter ones, and particularly the blue line, which is one I would try to do in the future, because it is another popular Hunter spec. So as we will see throughout this guide, there are three main themes when it comes to Redline Hunter. The first is building and consuming focus, kind of like all the Hunter specs. The second is getting large crits and just large hits in general with that. And then the third is we have a little extra focus, pun unintended there, on induction skills, actually the build focus. So we have a smaller focus on bleeds as well just throughout. It's kind of a Hunter thing, but we don't really have much going towards that. But anyway, we'll see how all these work together to create the mechanics for Redline Hunter and how our traits in the build affect that. So moving into the actual guide part of this video, this is how the build will look once it's finally finished, but we'll go ahead and respec it and see what we actually get in the Redline. This is kind of what you would start as. And as a low-level hunter, you might not have all these skills. I'm thinking in particularly Merciful Shot, you definitely want to have at this point. But yeah, you do get a lot of your skills as maybe you see within the Redline, and you get a lot of changes within it. So, the red line is a stationary high-impact line that rains bursts of damage upon the assailant using a rhythm of generating and consuming focus to maximize DPS. And you get a skill called Pinning Shot when you spec in, and this will be a focus consumer that will root the enemy and has a chance to break after you deal damage to them. It's got a pretty short cooldown, but the main use for that would be the root. And then you also get Needful Haste, which is a passive that your attacks have a 15% chance to grant a reduced swift bow induction and also just decreased attack duration, so you attack faster. Overall, after time in a fight, you would basically permanently have that up, which is nice. And you also get plus 10% range on all your range skills, which is nice. You can shoot from farther away and start fights from farther away, which can be impactful actually on your gameplay. So we'll go ahead and spec in, and we got Pinning Shot, which actually I have at control 5 here because it's not in my main rotation, as we will see later. But to go ahead and go over the traits in the first row here, we just have increase the target critical chance vulnerability of penetrating shot all the way up to 10% increase. So they kind of putting a point in that. Let's go ahead and see what that would do actually. And yeah, that gives a new debuff to penetrating shot actually, which gives them increased incoming range critical chance. And one thing I do want to note is this is actually improved penetrating shot you see on my skill bar because I'm pretty high level and I have that. And what improved penetrating shot does is it just doesn't have a cooldown. So we'll go ahead and actually respec. I just wanted to confirm with y'all what that effect actually does there and show that it's a whole new debuff there. But to look at the next point here, we have Critical Eye, which just increases crit chance up to 5%. That one's pretty simple, and it is linked to something as we see way down here actually called Deadly Precision. That's like at the second to last row. And then the third trait in this row is Fast Draw, so using Quick Shot grants a stacking buff which reduces the induction of attacks. And this goes up to minus 10%, but stacks up to 3 times, so that would actually be minus 30% bow inductions for 6 seconds at the maximum rank. So for the things in this row, I think the critical chance is most worth getting because the penetrating shot critical vulnerability debuff, while it is useful, compared to just getting raw crit chance, is definitely more impactful than that. And then on the note of Fast Draw, you actually don't have a chance to use Quick Shot all that much while solo or even in instances, especially while leveling at this low level. You just won't really get the effect of that. You won't really be able to stack it up much and get much reduced bow induction. And by the time you do get that, it'll be not too impactful to you because the mobs will be dying. Even thinking like boss fights in Great Barrow, some of the longer ones at maybe very low level, where this would have an effect, it's still not going to be all that useful, even though it is a useful thing to have in general, just not at this point. So I think getting the critical chance would be the best thing to get in the first row here, and moving on we'll have the first set bonus we get actually, and this one just reduces the induction of barbed arrow and swift bow. Both of those have really long induction, so getting the reduced induction on that is nice, especially as a redline hunter when you kind of have a focus on your induction skills, as I mentioned earlier. So in this row we get Heartseeker, which is a pretty famous hunter skill for doing a lot of damage. And this one is probably going to be worth getting. It's probably going to be what we first put our point in, but I do want to know, rank 2 says plus 5% Heartseeker bleed pulses. What it actually means is just plus 5 Heartseeker bleed pulses. So plus 5% would be 1/20th extra bleed pulses, and you already only have 5 bleed pulses, so that would mean it does nothing basically. So don't worry, it does something and actually gives plus 5 pulses, which makes the debuff, the dot, actually last 20 seconds, which is definitely nice. But moving on to the other traits in this row, we have just increased induction bow damage. That one's pretty simple, but at the 6th rank you get increased induction bow critical multiplier, playing to our crit theme for the redline hunters. And then the third trait in this row is increases swift bow damage, and then this one also has a special effect for the max rank, which gives quick shot a 20% chance to remove the induction of swift bow, so that's actually pretty nice. Once you get kind of the dynamic, you'll have a lot of sustained DPS with all the bonuses you get with quick shot, as you may see throughout this. But right now the most impactful would be to go ahead and get Heartseeker, I think. So I do want to note, Heartseeker has a 1:30 cooldown, and it does a ton of damage. You rarely actually get the extra chance where the extra bleed pulses, even though it doubles the bleed damage total basically, you rarely get a chance where that's actually going to be impactful on these shorter fights, especially while leveling again, and even in instances at this point you just won't get the effect from that. It's kind of like this other trait where it's useful, just not as useful as other things. So I think just getting the raw induction bow damage would be more useful, because you could get swift bow damage. That would be more damage on a single skill, but you want something that really affects more than a single skill at this point, and this will add damage to barb shot, quick shot, and swift bow. All 3 of those at this point, which is more worth it, I think. So putting 4 points in that will unlock the next row and set bonus. This set bonus is pretty simple, just increased range damage. So the first trait we have here in this row is called Quick Escape, and you won't lose focus whenever you use Low Cut, actually. And Low Cut on top of that applies a 3-second root, so kind of the dynamic with that is you can use Low Cut, run away from the mob, and you won't lose focus while running away from the mob, and then you can go ahead and go about your regular business doing damage to them again while avoiding damage. And one thing about Low Cut is it's actually a 9-target AoE, which is a ton of targets for an AoE in LOTRO. It's not really a DPS rotation type skill though, it just affects a lot of mobs. But yeah, that is actually something that's really appealing, and I think I find the uses for that sometimes while leveling. And personally on my hunters, I've been playing some of my low levels hunters recently to help with this, and I just didn't really find that actually worth putting a point in compared to other stuff I could put points in. And what you're basically sacrificing if you put points in this is just raw damage output. So if you feel like you need something like that or want something like that, you could definitely put a point in it at this point. It's just from my experience on my hunters, I think just simply killing faster, even though it will only be a little bit faster, but that would still be more useful. So in this row we also have Strength, which just increases strength stance damage. So you want to be in strength stance as a redline hunter, and that increases its damage. So it's basically a raw damage increase by up to 5% with 2 points in that. So from here we have to decide if it would be more worth it putting points in something here like critical multiplier, which requires you to get a crit, then you just get increased crit damage. That doesn't seem all too appealing. You could get swift bow damage, which that only affects one skill. Would rather definitely the raw damage over that, and we still have the same issue with fast draw and Heartseeker, and again true shot kind of has the same issue as well. You could get that debuff, but you would rather just raw critical damage instead of having to apply a skill to get a debuff, which would, you know, kind of increase your crit strength on them. So at this point, I think on my hunters I don't really crit enough, and this is what part of the testing I was doing. I just didn't really crit enough where I thought the critical multiplier would be more useful than the strength stance damage. So I think getting 2 points in the strength stance damage is worth it to go ahead and get that first. And then I would go ahead and put 2 more points in fast draw. Because yeah, we had it at 4 points, and then this one will get us the 3% increased bow damage, induction bow damage only, to note that this one increased both your focus and induction for that 5th point there. And then if we put the 6 point in this, we can go ahead and get that crit multiplier, and we still need to put 1 more point in something. I will re-emphasize that if you want low cut, you could do that definitely for a little bit more survivability boost, I guess, if you're doing some tougher stuff, or if you want something like damage, I would actually recommend going ahead and getting probably Swift and True would be best. If you find yourself in a lot of longer fights, you can go ahead and get Heartseeker. There are kind of a lot of options here. Redline Hunter and all the Hunter specs, really, you have a ton of options. It's not really quite like some of the other specs in the game where you're kind of, there are obvious choices where you want to get certain things at certain points. There are just a lot of options, and some of them are more impactful in certain ways. So what I would actually do on my Hunters now at this point is go ahead and get Quick Escape, because I just really like the utility of that. But again, if you want increased damage somewhere else you could get, I would recommend Swift and True or Heartseeker, actually, one of those two. But doing this will unlock the 3rd row and the 4th row, rather, the 3rd set bonus here. Okay, so this set bonus gives you a chance to apply a stacking critical defense debuff on enemies. So whenever you use a skill, you have a 20% chance to give them minus 1410 crit defense. And you should have that on them at all times. But one thing it notes is that it is stacking, and I am honestly not too sure what the effect of the stacking is. How much crit defense you would basically get and how much you can stack that. I am honestly not familiar with the exact number on that, but basically you should be able to, since it's a 10-second duration skill, you should be able to keep it up on enemies at all time and will increase your crit damage on them. That's the end effect of it. Again, I just don't know the exact numbers with that, with how much it stacks and how much of a debuff it gives, just to repeat myself again there multiple times. But anyway, that's what it does, and it does play to our crit theme. And then in this row, we have Infer the Kill, which we can't get. We actually have to put a 2nd point in Heartseeker there to be able to get this. But this one, it says Heartseeker applies moderate bleed damage now. Well, Heartseeker, a lot of the text in these traits actually aren't updated since they did hasn't even been that recent anymore, Hunter update. That was quite a while ago, but they still haven't actually updated the text on a few of these traits. Just so you all know, this is a good time, I guess, to mention that. I forgot about that in the beginning, but anyway. This applies moderate bleed damage, and it already does that, but it just increases the bleed damage basically, and also gives a minus 50% incoming healing. So if you have like a mob trying to heal themselves, or maybe in a PvMP situation, enemies trying to heal themselves, it will reduce that as well. But yeah, that would eventually probably be worth getting just for the increased bleed damage. But right now we have other priorities, definitely. So in this row, we could get Merciful Shot, critical multipliers increased up to 30%, so just increased crit damage from Merciful Shot. That is, again, something that affects only one skill, and it requires you to get a crit with that skill. And Merciful Shot is a pretty long cooldown skill and has a lot of requirements and basically prerequisites to use it of the enemy being below a certain health threshold, right now 50%. And the improved version, I want to note, I'm pretty sure that only adds the corruption removal. I think that's the only thing the improved version does versus the base version, which you would have at this lower level. But anyway, it's a strong skill. It's just kind of, you know, something that affects one thing and it's worth putting points in. It's just, is it worth putting points in right now? I don't think so. And then we have Rain of Arrows, which is a pretty strong AoE skill, actually. It has a 10-second cooldown and costs 3 focus. And this is also linked, as we'll see, to something down here called Hail of Arrows, and I think this is definitely worth putting 1 point in. You also note that you get increased critical chance and critical multiplier for putting more points in that. And I honestly don't think right now that is worth getting. We might see, I guess I'll just spoil, Hail of Arrows is not really worth it. Hail of Arrows used to be worth it, then they nerfed it like really bad, and now it's better to basically focus on your single target stuff and keep your emphasis on stuff you're strong on, instead of try to weakly improve your AoE DPS with Hail of Arrows basically. But anyway, the whole point of this is I don't think it's worth putting the 2nd point in that, and kind of foreshadowing a little bit of the reason why we might consider putting the 2nd point in it. It's not really worth it for that either. So at this point, you have to decide what you want to spend your points on, and I honestly recommend Swift Bow damage. I would recommend the penetrating shot critical vulnerability debuff, but you use Swiftbow a lot. That's kind of the main skill you'll be pulling with. It's a 10-second cooldown. It's just your strongest induction skill, and one thing you actually want to use a lot as your Redline Hunter here, especially at the lower level. Again, playing my low level hunters recently, it is something I definitely noticed and would be the best thing at this point, and I think we only had to spend 4 points in this, which is okay with that to unlock the next row. In this next row, we should actually get some useful things where we don't need to really backfill. And I do want to note, if you find you're never using Swiftbow, maybe you don't like it for some reason, or you're just like spamming quick shot, which I admit is a little bit fun, you could go ahead and get the penetrating shot critical vulnerability debuff, because that is something that is useful. I would just personally prioritize the Swiftbow damage, and if you're doing a lot of group content, actually it is more worth getting the penetrating shot true shot, this trait here, because in longer fights you will get the effect of that more on more of your skills, just the overall crit damage on them. But on a lot of shorter fights, just getting raw Swiftbow damage I notice is a lot more helpful, and we can still eventually backfill and get true shot for higher level when you start maybe having some slower fights while you're actually notice you want something like that maybe. But yeah, if you are doing a lot of group content, I do want to mention true shot would be better to spend your 4 points in right there. And then in the next set bonus, we have just increased critical damage for all bow attacks, playing to our crit theme, pretty simple right there. And in this row we have reduced inductions, which is definitely a nice thing. We have a lot of inductions, and making those quicker would definitely increase our output and just make the Redline Hunter faster to play, faster to level with, and overall a nice thing. Then we also get Burn Hot, which is a cooldown skill to greatly increase range damage. It's a lot of percent it increases it, and it reduces skill power cost. And then on top of that, the second rank even further increases the damage, reduces the cooldown, and further reduces the power cost. So definitely worth getting both of those eventually, but I personally think getting 1 point in Burn Hot is worth it over the skill induction. I always love stuff that reduces skill inductions, by the way, if y'all haven't watched my other trait guides. Any of the other classes or specs I've done, that's something I highly prioritize, but I don't quite think getting the second point in that is worth it, because again, I like the reducing the skill inductions. I do think getting, again, the one, I put one in it, but think getting the 1 point in that just to have it is really nice. So at this point we have the choice between reduce all skill inductions and the second point in Burn Hot, and I honestly think, even though if you've watched any of my other trait guide videos, you know I love reduce skill inductions, I honestly think it is worth getting the second point in Burn Hot, just because the second point in that makes it so much more effective. If you find you're never using Burn Hot though, you could go ahead and start putting your points in Quick Draw, but it's only 1 point for that huge bonus, and then you can start putting your points in Quick Draw pretty easily from there, which getting 3 of those will unlock the next row in set bonus. So the next set bonus here is called Swift Mercy, and this increases the health threshold for Merciful Shot, and it makes Swiftbow reduce the focus cost of Merciful Shot per use. So you can get Merciful Shot to be pretty cheap focus-wise and use it on a target up to 70% health now instead of 50%. So that's a pretty nice thing, and definitely want to note its effect that you'll sometimes have reduced Merciful Shot cost and can use Merciful Shot more. Basically, really strong focus consumers for Redline Hunters as well. So in this row we have just mitigation bypass for bow attacks. You can kind of think of that as just a raw damage increase, which will be flat for all of our skills, so it's definitely nice and something to consider. In this row we also have critical hit should generate 1 focus, so that's actually going to generate a lot of focus because we have all this crit theme, all this crit chain stuff, and really playing to the crit theme of the Redline Hunter once again, that you get focus now whenever you crit. So it'll help with focus consumption, or with focus building, not consumption overall. You'll have more focus consumption with that. And then in this row we have Hail of Arrows. So to actually go over what this does, is Rain of Arrows critical hits actually have a 50% chance to reset the cooldown of Rain of Arrows, and just like completely reset it so you can spam Rain of Arrows. But the catch is that that can occur more than once every 30 seconds, and that is why it's not worth putting points into the extra point into Rain of Arrows to get Hail of Arrows anymore. So the way it was pre-nerf was that you didn't have that once every 30 seconds, so you could actually spam Hail of Arrows a little bit decently and do decent AoE DPS as a Redline Hunter. But they decided they wanted hunters to be more of a single target, and if you put points on this, you could improve your AoE DPS. So I do want to know, if you're finding yourself in a lot of AoE situations where you want some increased AoE DPS, you could definitely put a point in Rain of Arrows, then put your 2 points in Hail of Arrows. And the second point, I don't think I actually explicitly mentioned that, but it makes it Rain of Arrows critical hits have a 100% chance to reduce the cooldown. Also to note on that is you do actually have to get the crit of Rain of Arrows, but if you're hitting a lot of targets, chances are you actually will get the crit, especially once you put the second point in Rain of Arrows there to increase the crit chance further. But yeah, that is, if you want slightly increased AoE damage, an option you have to put points in. But I think at this point I would go ahead and actually spend one more point to reduce my skill inductions further, and then get Deadly Precision to get increased focus. And then we are back to having to decide. So one appealing thing back here is getting Quick Shot to reduce the induction of Swift Bow by 100% and increase Swift Bow damage even further. That is definitely something you could put your last point in here if you really want to reduce the induction of Swift Bow and make it instant cast. That is a pretty fun thing. If you're finding yourself using Quick Shot a lot, basically, that's when this would really be worth it. Otherwise, I just consider the flat damage boost provided by Bodkin Arrows here is what that is called. To bypass the mitigation, just the flat damage output of that would be more worth it, which unlocks the next set bonus and row here. So in this set bonus, we actually get a buff to Camouflage, which is our stealth skill. It increases the stealth level, so you'll be harder to detect. And you also get a huge increased crit chance buff while Camouflage. So this makes you want to start a fight while Camouflage because you get all of the crit chance from it. 50% increased crit chance, which is quite a lot. So yeah, that's good to know that you'll want to start fights generally in Camouflage if you can now, if you really want that increased crit chance. Oftentimes you just kill so fast with the Hunter you can ignore it anyway. But to max min a little bit, I do know that you have that. And then in this last row here, we're already to the last row, and we can get Upshot, which is an active skill with a 20-second cooldown and consumes up to 9 focus to do a lot of damage. So basically a strong focus consumer actually. With the 20-second cooldown, can't always spam it, but whenever you have 9 focus and you have Upshot up, might as well use it for a lot of damage. That's basically what it is. Use on cooldown basically is how it turns out to be. And the plant feat here is you hold your ground even under enemy fire, so you get increased evade chance after standing still for 1.5 seconds. And moving breaks this until you root once more. Honestly, that is not good. You get a little bit of survivability for standing still, which just basically not good. So I'd get a point in Upshot and then build 2 more points in Bodkin Arrows. And now we have finished out the red line here. Actually, now we have finished the red line here. And then as a spoiler, I guess I would put the next 2 points in Bodkin Arrows. But anyway, at this part is where I like to actually go and say we finished the red line. And we need to go back and decide what we want to put points on to just fill out our rest of our points and get the next set bonus here. So Bodkin Arrows, I would go ahead and put 2 in to get increased mitigation bypass. And then I think at this point I would go ahead and just get rank 5 on Swift and True. And then I would go ahead and start putting points in True Shot. We can go ahead and put all 5 points in True Shot. Unlocking the set bonus won't really mess with that. And I guess on the legendary servers I do want to mention, I don't know exactly how many trait points you can get in Moria now, but I believe it's somewhere around 40 it would be, because you can get 5 more than, I believe is how that would work. So you can get at least 39, I know, and this would be like all 39, but I'm pretty sure you can get 1 or 2 more maybe, maybe even more than that, somewhere in the low 40s. But anyway, as far as the legendary servers go, this is kind of where the build would start filling out, especially as you get towards the end of Moria here. And if you've gotten like all your class deed traits done, all your class deeds to get the trait points from those done, you'll have more points like this. But if you don't have those done, you might not quite have all these points yet. Anyway, we can go ahead and move on here with the set bonus. And this set bonus is actually pretty nice and has a big effect. So Heartseeker and Upshot cooldown. So Upshot has the 20-second cooldown and Heartseeker has the minute 30-second cooldown, which is pretty significant. Both of those cooldowns are reduced whenever you get a critical and devastating hit. On devastating hit, which is basically a stronger critical hit, which you have less chance to get even, that will reduce the cooldown by 4 seconds, while regular kit will reduce the cooldown by 2 seconds. So that is definitely nice to have. You'll just be able to use Heartseeker and Upshot more frequently with that, which is nice because they're two big components of our DPS. So at this point, speaking of Heartseeker, I think it is worth going ahead and getting the second point, increasing the ticks on that, and increasing the bleed damage on that, and at this point we have to decide the filler. If you use Quick Shot a lot, go ahead and get that. If you use Merciful Shot a lot, go ahead and get that. That's basically what it plays out to, whichever two of those skills use more frequently. And I think because Merciful Shot has a longer cooldown, you can't really use it all that much. I would go ahead and put my 5 points in Fast Draw first, because use Quick Shot a lot more, because again, the cooldown of Merciful Shot being 30 seconds kind of prevents me from using it all that frequently and making this trait worth it more than the other one. So yeah, that's how I would fill out the red line, and I personally only have 3 more points available. Could have a lot more. You could have like 91, I think now is the maximum, which would be quite a bit. But as far as the lines I would go into, if you really want mitigation, you could go in the yellow line and get some survivability. You could also get explosive arrow in there. And there are some decent things in the yellow line. But the blue line is where a lot of strong stuff is, and the Hunter in general, you'll find whichever spec you could go, you could use as many trait points. You could use probably like 300 trait points or something and still be increasing your damage, which you might not find in all the other classes with their specs like that. But just because a lot of things you have a lot of similar themes with the focused consumers and builders and all that stuff, you'll find that the blue line, putting points in that, will overall increase your damage output and also sustain if you can get something like Press Onward to get the morale and power restore out of that. So that is a nice thing to foreshadow. I wouldn't really consider putting points in Split Shot, it's not the most useful. And then Quick Shot, bonus focus application, of course building more focus, that would be helpful for the red line here. Getting Exsanguinate just to get an extra bleed there would be nice. You actually don't have Blood Arrow, so that was totally a mistake on my part. Since you don't have Blood Arrow, there would be no point in putting the trait points here to get Exsanguinate there. But anyway, you could also get increased damage over time, which you could also get in the yellow line here. Actually, that would be another useful thing in the yellow line, the increased damage over time. But overall, I would start with stuff in the blue line. And then if you have enough trade points, I don't know how many this would be, getting increased Merciful Shot and Heartseeker to deal additional damage on bleeding targets, because you'll want to have your bleeds, that's useful. Getting the power restore from Strength of the Earth if you have any power issues, that's useful. And then just a lot of stuff down here would be useful. Not really the Precision Stance one, but Hunter skills, return power, useful for sustain there. Using a skill that costs focus, removing the bow induction of your next attack, very useful because you want to use your induction skills a lot. Focus consumers, even rapid fire, just spamming Upshot. Well, actually you can't spam Upshot, I take that back. Been doing this too long, but yeah, all that stuff would be useful. I don't know why I went that far, but you can't actually put points in that. But anyway, just kind of showing you why I guess the blue line has a lot of useful things that you'd want to go into it with. But as far as the first row, the stuff I can actually put points in, we'll go ahead and get to that. We have increased damage for skills that consume focus, which is useful. We want to increase the damage of those, but I just think raw damage output would be more useful than the 5% damage increase on that, because this does affect all of our skills. So we will go ahead and apply that, and I do have one trait point, actually this character left to spend, so I figure I might as well go ahead and get Plant Feet, a little bit of survivability boost. If you didn't have that like one trait point, that one odd one, I wouldn't put a point in that, but if you do, that is something like might as well put in, I suppose. Okay, so now we are ready for the great gameplay section. So that's the trait build again, but I want to mention my Hunter. So your performance at this level range, at high level, is strongly tied to your legendary item and how many starlight crystals you put into it, which for a physical class like this will be your weapon DPS. And as you can see, I could actually get my DPS up to 1600. It's only 851 right now, which would be, basically my skills would do twice as much damage because of that. And as far as Mordor goes, my DPS, the max tier, at least 49, I have 1000, isn't all too bad. So I am a little bit low on my weapon DPS there, but for my specific level where I am, it's actually not all that bad compared to my other characters. But note, you could still have a ton more DPS if you're more up to code on your gear and had more starlight crystals put into this and leveled a bit better. So that is one thing to note. Another thing to note is I actually have a decent amount of Light of Rendell gear, but decent amount, not good enough for Mordor. You need actually even more than a decent amount, and this will increase my incoming damage and decrease my outgoing damage, so another thing to make me seem weaker here. And I mention all of this because I'm actually pretty strong, honestly. Hunters are pretty strong right now. I also have a broken piece of gear, which is like really bad if I'm doing a guide. So that's like even weaker on my part. That's actually not the best piece of gear, just lose a little bit of defense from that basically. But just to note all that stuff, I wanted to let y'all know to give you some context here for the gameplay. But I am in Landscape. This character is actually pretty good here. I'm Bal. It's a pretty good area to show the gameplay section, I think, actually, which is one of the few characters I've actually been able to do that on. So we'll go ahead and start this fight, try to go over some of the stuff we got in our traits and stuff while we go through this gameplay section. And yeah, kind of start there with improved focus. We're going to fight a signature, so I think starting with camouflage here and just going straight to Heartseeker, and then upshot is going to be useful. And see, that did a ton of damage, and now I'm going to start building to merciful shot, use that, and yeah, that should kill him. So that's all I needed to do on a signature, and just kind of imagine how if I actually was more up to code on not only my Light of Verndil gear but my LI, how strong this character would be. I also didn't use Burn Hot that fight, which is huge damage increase. So this one's kind of similar, just start with Swift Bow there and then use Upshot and then kind of go Barbed Arrow. And now use Quick Shot a little bit while I need to consume focus, but he died anyway pretty quickly there. This fight I kind of just started with Quick Shot. It shows the strength of Quick Shot actually if you spam that. It's still a pretty decent skill. And you really start decreasing your inductions because of that. We have minus 30% bow induction from that. So it really allows you to use Quick Shot pretty quickly. So we'll go ahead and gather some focus here and actually start in camouflage like we should. And I personally need to test this out. Using Burn Hot in camouflage does not remove camouflage, so that's good to know. You can go ahead and use Burn Hot there pre-pull while in camouflage and get all that. And one thing I want to know about the gameplay is you want to try to use Penetrating Shot every 10 seconds if possible to get those debuffs. Those debuffs are actually pretty strong and something that will increase your output quite a bit. So they are things you want to get on the enemy and keep up every 10 seconds even if you don't even if you'd have Upshot available, for example, you'd want to get the debuff of Penetrating Shot on the enemy unless you're about to kill them. And a lot of solo stuff like this, that doesn't come into play as much. But I did want to note that, and hopefully just with this gameplay, I'm trying to keep up with it, but I do kill stuff pretty quickly here. But trying to keep up with it with you all to describe what I'm doing a little bit and how the traits we got affect it. But a lot of the skills like Upshot I'm using is just a raw trait, and Heartseeker actually one-shot that mob, it looks like. So we'll go ahead and use Upshot for this fight actually, and did a lot of damage to him. And I haven't even actually had to use Pinning Shot yet, which if you're not killing enemies as they get to you or a little bit scared of your survivability, you could use Pinning Shot. Like right here is when I might use Pinning Shot, run away. I could have used Low Cut there as well so I didn't lose focus, but not much of an issue. And then just kind of burn him down with Quick Shot, build some focus quickly. This is a good time to use Pinning Shot actually, except he was able to get to me by the time it actually went off. And then yeah, go out a little bit and start using Quick Shot a lot, build focus, and then I can use Upshot there, and he died. So usually these gameplay sections go about 5 minutes. I think that's a good time for me to try to describe what's going on and for y'all to see a little bit. I used Pinning Shot there, but he died, so it didn't really matter. So here's a signature. This could be something a little bit more interesting if we can fight him. I do have to, again, worry a little bit about my survivability because I take a lot increased incoming damage, but because of how strong I am, I'm kind of avoiding mobs and avoiding them hitting me, which is one big thing I want to do. Like if we notice, if I let these mobs just sit here attacking me, I start dying pretty quickly from a single mob even. So I think this is a good time to use Low Cut, go ahead and get the root, and then we can run away a little bit. And then we should be able to hopefully kill both of them actually. Got both of their morales a little bit down low there, and yeah, we were able to handle that okay. I still lost almost half my morale total, which isn't that good. But here's the signature. If we actually go in camouflage, pull in with Heartseeker and everything, we can unload a lot of burst DPS here pretty quickly. Already got him down about halfway, and I think this is a good time to go ahead and use my root. Back off, and then I can go ahead and kind of start fresh here. I have Merciful Shot off cooldown, so I can go ahead and use that, and then I'll kill him there. There is Crota's small chest. Wonder what that has. Is this just one of these Mordor chests? Kind of totally off topic of the guide, but yeah. That was a good thing for this character, I guess. So we can go ahead and kill. Here's actually an archer. We can have a couple archer duels here. Oops, I accidentally used camouflage before I got to finish building focus there. So yeah, I killed the one pretty quick. We just have a lot of burst damage to open our fights. And then we have all those bonuses with quick shot, but still our sustain is not as good as, I guess. If you compare to another class, whenever we can do our burst damage with all our things, all our various things for burst damage. Actually, I have 3 mobs on me now, that's not good. We'll go ahead and we need to get the root back on him. So we'll go ahead and use Burn Hot here. I think this is a good time to go ahead and get Heartseeker on one of these mobs, try and kill one of them. And then I have a lot of utility skills, but I don't know which does which from here. So we have a Daze right here, and then I believe I have another Daze, a melee range Daze, but that's not really doing anything on them. So once again, I'm taking a lot of damage. I don't know if I have anything to actually survive, so I think that was a good time to end. You kind of saw I got overwhelmed. In a normal character where actually you don't have that Light of Arundel issue and maybe can do as much DPS as you should be doing, that wouldn't have been an issue, and I am a little bit out of practice with Hunter with my utility stuff. I could have even have used Desperate Flight there. I've been playing too many other characters like my Wardens and Runekeeper lately. But setting all that aside, that was a good point to actually end the gameplay section with how much we did, I think. And I hope again this gameplay section was useful, showing how kind of the traits work out, all of our crit stuff basically, and our huge burst damage with our openers and camouflage and the improved focus, all that stuff. So yeah, I hope this was helpful to you, and I hope the guide as a whole was helpful to you, going through all the traits that Redline Hunter have, all the things you want, just the actual order you want them, what I think on that. But yeah, I hope you did enjoy and maybe learn something from that. If you did, please consider liking and subscribing for more, and if you have any feedback, please do let me know, and thanks for watching, everyone.